Loneliness is strange because the lonelier we become, the harder it becomes to connect with other people. That doesn't make any sense, does it? If you're thirsty, you look for water. If you're hungry, you look for food. So why, when we crave connection the most, we often stop reaching out? Psychologists have spent years trying to answer this question, and what they discovered is both fascinating and a little unsettling. Because being alone doesn't just change how you feel, it quietly changes the way your brain sees the world. And if you don't notice it, it can trap you in a cycle that becomes harder and harder to escape. Maybe you've experienced something like this. You pick up your phone, you think about texting someone, you even open the conversation. Then a thought appears. They're probably busy. I don't want to bother them. Maybe another day. So you put your phone back down. A few days later, the same thing happens again. At first, it feels like a small decision. But months later, you suddenly realize you haven't talked to that person in ages. Now, here's the strange part. Most people think loneliness begins because nobody reaches out. But what if that's only half the story? Because according to psychology, the most dangerous thing about loneliness isn't being alone. It's what loneliness convinces you to believe. To understand why, we need to go back thousands of years. For our ancestors, being separated from the group wasn't just uncomfortable, it could be deadly. If you were alone, you had fewer people to protect you, go hunting with you, or help you survive. So evolution gave us a brain that treats social isolation like a warning signal. Not physical pain, but social pain. That's why rejection can hurt so deeply. Your brain isn't overreacting. It's responding to something it has been trained to see as a threat. But here's where things start to go wrong. That same survival system doesn't know the difference between real rejection and imagined rejection. And once your brain starts expecting rejection, it begins finding it everywhere, even when it isn't there. Imagine one of your friends takes 6 hours to reply to your message. Objectively, there are hundreds of possible explanations. Maybe they're working. Maybe they're driving. Maybe they're taking a break from their phone, but loneliness whispers something else. They're ignoring you. A coworker walks past without saying hello. They must not like me. Someone cancels dinner. They were probably looking for an excuse. But to be honest, believing those stories isn't actually the biggest problem. What happens next is... Do you notice something? Loneliness doesn't give you facts, it gives you stories. And the more lonely you feel, the more believable those stories become. But to be honest, believing those stories isn't actually the biggest problem. What happens next is... Think about how you behave when you expect rejection. You hesitate before speaking. You stop sending the first message. You decline invitations because you're convinced nobody really wants you there. You become quieter, more distant, more careful. Not because you dislike people, because you're trying to protect yourself. And that's completely understandable. The problem is, other people can only see your behavior. They can't hear the fears inside your mind. From their perspective, it looks like you want space. So they stop reaching out as often. Not because they dislike you, but because they're responding to the signals you're unintentionally sending. Psychologists call this a self-fulfilling prophecy. You fear rejection. That fear changes your behavior. Your behavior changes other people's reactions. This is why loneliness is so powerful. It doesn't just change your emotions, it quietly changes your future. But here's something that gives us hope. The cycle isn't nearly as unbreakable as it feels. Most people think the solution to loneliness is finding more people. Sometimes that's true. But often, the first step is much smaller. It's learning to question the stories your brain automatically creates. The next time you catch yourself thinking, they're probably too busy. I don't want to bother them. They probably don't care. Pause. Ask yourself one simple question. Do I actually know that's true? Or is my brain trying to protect me from a rejection that hasn't happened? That single question creates something incredibly important. Space. Space between your thoughts and your actions. Because once you stop treating every fearful thought like a fact, you give reality a chance to surprise you. Here's the irony. Lonely people usually don't want less connection. They want it more than anyone. But the very emotion that's pushing them toward others is also convincing them to stay away. That's why loneliness can become a cycle. Not because we're broken, not because people don't care, but because fear has a remarkable ability to disguise itself as certainty. And maybe that's the most important thing to remember. Your brain's job is to protect you, not to tell you the truth. Sometimes those are the same thing. Sometimes they're worlds apart.